Hello and thanks for joining me. Today I'm on the west coast of Anglesey, just outside Runcinata, and I'm going to have a walk and see what wildlife I can find. Bad way to start a walk. I've just had about 120 curlew flying from the back of me and land in the field just in front of me, joined with about 35 oystercatcher and about 60 starling. And what's nice is usually curlew and oystercatcher can be quite skittish around people, so the fact that they've just landed in front of me is really quite nice. And it's allowing me to watch the curlews really probe the soil looking for worms and things. That bill is ridiculous, isn't it, how long it is. They're a wonderful bird, and the oystercatchers, many of them now have their full winter plumage, because in summer their heads are black with a totally black neck as well, but in winter they often get a white half ring on their neck. So if you're wondering what time of year it is, it's definitely winter according to the oystercatchers. And it is nice to see a three-figure flock of curlew, because they are having a hard time breeding. Back in my native Rochdale, curlew just haven't really been producing young for a number of years now, not in any serious way, and their numbers have been dwindling as a breeding bird in those kind of areas. So hopefully this is a sign that maybe in some parts they've had a good breeding season. But yeah, I'm going to enjoy this flock while I can, because there's a dog walker on the horizon who I don't think has noticed them. And I imagine these curlew and oystercatcher are quickly going to fly off, and as soon as they fly off, I'm going to head off too. Now, it hasn't taken me long to get distracted by some lovely lichens. There's one down here called Anaptychia runcinata, which is a mouthful early in the morning. And it's a pain because lots of the lichens don't have common English names. They're all still using scientific names, and it's a shame because you could be really descriptive with some of these lichens. But this is a species that I normally see in summer when I'm around this part of the coast, and then it's often dry and takes on a very brown, greyish appearance. In the last few days we've had lots and lots of rain, and because of that this lichen has now changed colour and become a nice rich olivey green colour. So it's kind of a bit of a chameleon, this lichen, and totally changing colour depending on how dry or how wet it is. Many lichens do that, but this one is quite almost like two totally different species depending on the weather. It's in a colony of lots of other lichens that I'm going to spend some more time with, lots of coastal specialties. Some of these lichens occur right around the coast, but no more than kind of 10 metres inland. That's how restricted they are. And you can see on some of the rocks behind me, lots of colour, bits of yellow and greens and things like that, punctuations of colour. And the Welsh word for lichens really sums that up. It's cenni, which means it's a word that's derived from mark or blemish. And that's exactly what they are. There's little dots of colour and punctuations of colour all over the rocks, etc. It's a wonderful descriptive word for exactly what they are. So I'm going to get some video as the RAF start to fire up some of their jets from RAF Valley over there. Yeah, and enjoy some of these lichens. Might seem surprising to be looking at flowering plants in the middle of winter, but there's plenty of gorse along this stretch of the coast, and my grandma used to say, when gorse is out of flower, kissing's out of fashion, because gorse can flower 12 months of the year. But there's another plant down here that I wanted to show you, which is Alexander's, which is not strictly a native plant. It's thought it was brought here by the Romans, hence the other name for it, which is Roman cabbage. And it's a member of the umbellifer family. And even though it is edible, not one to mess around with if you don't really know you're foraging, because there are plants around here you could confuse it with, which are deadly poisonous, plants like hemlock wort or dropwort. But it's really abundant around this part of the coast. It likes the coastal areas. You sometimes find it inland along road networks where they salt the roads, mimicking that kind of coastal environment. But it's a really early spring flowering plant, often in flower in February, March, April. And if you're a really early spring flowering plant, you need to get a head start with your leaf growth, so that often they're growing right the way through winter. producing their new leaves, and some of these leaves are already infected with a rust fungus called Alexander's rust, and you can often spot it because the leaves become spotted and parts of the stems as well. So it's well worth keeping an eye out for. So even in the depths of winter, you can still find flowering plants. I'm really quite chuffed. I've just come down to this little bay and there's lots of wading birds gathered all around it, including some redshank and some oystercatchers, but also 3 of my favourite waders. There's about half a dozen ring plover, which is wonderful to see in amongst the rocks, because when you see that black and white plumage, you kind of think, how on earth are these things camouflaged? They stick out like a sore thumb. But in amongst the rocks, it kind of makes sense. It does really work well as camouflage. There's some turnstone, with some of them being a bit lazy and having a bit of a snooze and a doze, but some of them living up to their name and actually turning over stones and looking for food. And then there's my favourite, purple sandpiper, because often it looks like a nondescript wader, but when you see it in the sunlight and the light catches their feathers, that you can understand why they're called purple. On dull days, they're just kind of a greyish colour. And I've had at least 12 of those, which I'm quite chuffed with, because normally I get purple sandpiper a little bit further up the coast and don't often get them down on this beach. And the turnstones, purple sandpiper and ring plover, really quite friendly. There's some just knocking around in front of me here. So I'm going to get the camera out, probably my lunch, and spend a bit of time photographing the birds. To rename this series of videos Walks and Wildlife. It needs to be Walks or Wildlife, because I spent the last 4 hours walking up probably not even a mile, and that's because there's loads to see. There's lots of birds, lichens, some plants, all sorts of things, and it just means you've just got slow progress. If you're spending time watching them or photographing them or filming, as I'm having to do, then I'm not going to get very far. And I think some walks where you can walk miles and miles and miles, it's often because there's not much wildlife to look at, or it's very monotonous very quickly. Walking over the moors, for example, in many parts you can do miles after miles without barely seeing anything of interest. Whereas some places like this, there's lots going on. So you're going to spend time immersing yourself in that wonderful nature that you're seeing. And on a day like today, after a month of what has felt like constant grey days, wind, rain, etc., it's just fantastic to be out and just potter about. So yeah, I think it's potter and wildlife, we'll call it perhaps. But yeah, such a nice day. Even the RAF are out flying in force. So yeah, let's see what else we can find. Tempted to go and do a bit of rock pooling and look for some different species, but I haven't got the gear for it today, so I'm going to stay on dry land. But there's a couple of seaweeds I thought I'd show you. I have got a seaweed video that I'm going to do in January, looking at the foraging and identification of seaweeds, but in the meantime, 2 that I really want to show you today. One's called egg rack, and it's a typical rack in it's that kind of browny, bronzy kind of colour, tagliatelle kind of fronds, but with air bubbles in. And it's often host to another seaweed called siphon rack, which grows on other seaweeds. Can grow on a number of other species, but egg rack is by far its commonest. And wherever you get egg rack, you often find siphon rack as well. So yeah, I thought I'd share both of those with you now. Wandering over some of these rocks, and there's loads of molluscs about. There's limpets and winkles and all sorts of things, but one of the species that's caught my eye is a mollusk called thick topshell, sometimes called toothed topshell, and it's really quite pretty. The shell is this, when it's wet, this kind of slaty, purpley, bluey, dark colour, but the top of it, at the top of the shell, often kind of scratches away, revealing the mother of pearl kind of coloration there. And when the light catches it, it's absolutely beautiful. And the rocks here, absolutely littered in them. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And again, I could spend all day just exploring the nooks and crannies all around this bit of the coast, looking at what's in the rock pools and on the rocks and stuff, but I won't make much progress doing that, so I'll grab a couple of pickies and then move on. Illustrate perfectly the kind of lichen communities you get on the coast that absolutely just cover the area, and some more obvious than others. So on the top we have sea ivory, which is this lovely kind of green lichen that often carpets the top of these coastal boulders. It is very coastal, you don't find it very far inland at all, but along kind of big coastal boulders around the UK it is really, really quite common. But then you've got two others which are much more, well, unassuming, but one's so unassuming that it's blindingly obvious. Hydropunctaria mora, which is this big thick black line all along the rock, which at a distance you can see this black banding through the rock, and that's a lichen. And it grows on these coastal kind of rocks, likes to be splashed by the water, and it occurs as a band all the way around the UK pretty much. And then you've got another species called Calemopsidium, which grows on barnacles. Because even though it's a limestone specialist, this lichen, you've got to remember that limestone's made up of shells, so it will occur on things like barnacles, limpets, and it causes these little pits, these little dark spots in the shell, these black little pits. So you've got three different lichens absolutely covering this area, all the barnacles all over these rocks. You've got this thick black line of the Hydropunctaria and the sea ivory all on the top. Lichens just absolutely covering this area, but unless you really kind of look, you don't often see them, if that makes sense. So yeah, stunning rocks covered in lichen. Wondering what species to end this video on, and it's going to be the humble mussel, because this rock is absolutely strewn in mussels covered in barnacles and they look fantastic. So I'm going to spend a bit of time, the photographer in me wants to take pictures and do maybe some abstract stuff, look at patterns and textures, because it's such an array of mussels and barnacles. It's too good to kind of miss this opportunity. So if I get any nice images, I'll put them up at the end. But hopefully you've enjoyed this kind of potter, and it's going to show that even in the depths of winter there's still plenty of wildlife to go out and see. A lot of people think winter is just going out looking at birds and that's about it. But we've shown that there's plenty of lichens, there's seaweeds, there's molluscs, there's even flowering plants to that, as well as the birds. And you can go out and spend hours and hours and hours, like I have, just walking up and down a beach, encountering all sorts of interesting things. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've seen some species that you might never even knew existed. And if you have enjoyed this video, why don't you like and subscribe, and you can join me next time. See you again.